Share. Okay, it is Parshah Nitzavim Vayeilech, and in addition to being the last 4 weeks of this year, there are a number of highlights that we're going to go through as we go through step number 1, what's up in the Jewish calendar this week, and from there we're also going to go into what's happening in the Parshah, and it's a double Parshah in that, and then from there we're going to go into one element, one practical side of one of the lessons we can learn from in this week's Parshah. We had started off this Shabbos with a big day, Chayel, we mentioned last week, which is a big Yom Tov on the Hasidic calendar in recent history. But since Shabbos, every day of this week corresponds to another month, because we're in the countdown. It's the last 12 days in the calendar year before Rosh Hashanah, which corresponds to the 12 months, 1 day for 1 month. So if the first of those 12 days were Shabbos, that would have corresponded to the month of Tishrei. Unfortunately, this past Tishrei had a very difficult ending. It was October 7th, and Simchas Shmini Atzeres is the beginning of a lot of tragic and horrific news coming out of Eretz Yisrael, and a lot of people still suffering till this very day. And we daven. We hope that they have a very quick and full salvation and comfort. But throughout that Tishrei, following on to the yesterday, Sunday's day, corresponded to Cheshvan. It's the second month in the Jewish calendar year in which many of us might remember the good things we got involved in whilst grappling with the new reality of our world. And then when we come to today, Monday, which is the third of those 12 days, we're thinking about what happened in the month of Kislev, whether it was the first of Kislev, the Yom Tov of Yutas Kislev, and of course the Yom Tov of Hanukkah. What are the good things we did this Hanukkah? What were the good achievements and the good investments that we made that we want to continue and keeping them alive by not just leaving them behind into history, but instead to keep them into something that we can practically do as we go forward. And the same thing will be with tomorrow and each of the following days. Every day we want to stop and think about where we can take inspiration from the months that have passed by this year. And of course, if there's anything that we regret or we missed throughout the year, that would be a great time to invest in the future, to take inspiration even from the things that we missed out of, in order that we can continue growing and bringing our reality into a Geula reality. That's what's happening every day of this week. But when it comes to this Shabbos, there's also a very big highlight. It's known as Shabbos Salichos. It's the Shabbos which has the starting time for most Ashkenazic Jews of when we start saying Salichos to Hashem. And it starts off with a midnight Salichos after Shabbos. And the reason we wait for midnight is because during Shabbos we don't say Salichos. This is Yom Kippur will fall on Shabbos. We'll also have certain things we will refrain from saying throughout Yom Kippur because out of respect for Shabbos. And the same thing applies after Shabbos. Even when Shabbos is over, we still have some level of honor for the Shabbos, and therefore we don't say Salichos in the Motzei Shabbos mode. Only after halachic midnight passes, that's when we would start to say Salichos ideally, and that's when we start reading the different poems, piyutim, and the important phrase that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu that always secures forgiveness, slicha, and that is the Hashem Ke'orach Mechanon, the 13 attributes of mercy, which, as we know, is very appropriate for the month of Elul, in which the king is in the field when the Yud Gimel Mitzrachim are made available to the farmers on their level. You use the word farmers loosely, as we explained, and we said that this is when Hashem meets us in our kitchen. Hashem meets us in our sitting room, wherever else we do, whatever else we're involved in, and on that level, Hashem wants us to have encouragement. Hashem wants us to know that what we do really matters. Just to add one more point about the king in the field and the Salichos connection, the Mamarim spend a lot of time explaining why the king, who's really should be involved in all sorts of office and high-level work, instead comes out to the field. And a big part of that is to show acknowledgement, which will lend enormous encouragement to the farmer who never makes it to the big city, to the farmer who's involved in the breadline, in working and making sure that everybody's doing their job, has it what they need in order to continue doing what they're doing. And the importance of the farmer is at risk of being unnoticed. And therefore, not only unnoticed by others, but by the farmer themselves, where the farmer may think, who am I? Some schlepper, doing nisht. I'm not making the headlines. No one's noticing what I'm doing. When in truth, even the king relies on, survives on, and continues to do what kings do, using the food that is grown in the field. So although the farmer has their job, and it can't be necessarily compared to perhaps what the royalty and those who run the country are doing, but in their own way, it's so essential. It's the foundation of what it takes. And the king wants to come and meet the farmer, not in the palace, where the farmer will further forget just how relevant and important their job is. That the king meets the farmer out in the farmland, in the fields. Just to put that into a modern day equivalent, unfortunately, so often a Jewish mother may forget that when they're changing a nappy, where they're making food, where they're whatever else they might be doing at home, might be overlooked, underappreciated, go unnoticed, but worse still by their own self. When a person doesn't appreciate just how vital their work is, the king makes the effort, takes the journey to come and meet us in wherever it is we're doing, to remind us just how relevant we are. And as we come to the time of slichos, that's exactly what we want to remind ourselves. Some doesn't need us to say slichos for somebody else. Some wants us to find slichos in wherever it is we're up to. I'm just going to do mute. If anyone wants to unmute anytime, please feel free to unmute. We are going to talk a little bit about this week's Parshah Nitzavim Vayeilech, but that also ties into what's going on in the calendar. We have a double reading. It's Nitzavim and Vayeilech together. And the relevance of having a double Parashah, obviously, technically, is because we have less Shabbosim available between now and Simchas Torah, where we finish the Torah. And it's not because there isn't Shabbos, but because each one of these Shabbosim will be also a highlight of a Yom Tov, starting off with Yom Kippur, which will take up one Shabbos. And right after that, the next Shabbos will be already Chol Hamoed Sukkos. And before you know it, it's Simchas Torah. So we have this Shabbos available. And the following Shabbos, which will be Shabbos Shuvah, will be Shabbos Azinu. And that's why we have technically two parashas crammed into 1 week. But of course, we understand if we have two parashas and we live with the parasha of the week, as the Alter Rebbe would often say, "Daf leben mit der Zeit," we've got to live with the times, with the Torah parasha this week. This week has double energy. It has double readings. It's not that long in amount of Pesukim, but it's a loaded parsha. There's some fascinating quotes that are often reminded to us when we're looking for inspiration, and they are from this week's parashas. But starting off with a very opening phrase, Atem Nitzavim Hayom Kulchem. We are all standing up, standing strong today. And Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to the Yiddish people. Rashi in the basic explanation says Nitzavim means the Yiddish people shouldn't be afraid of the curses or the hardships that they've been foretold in last week's reading. And therefore Moshe says, look, you are standing strong even regardless of and despite or through the hardships that Hashem has spoken about in the previous Sedra. And that's why Atem Nitzavim is so relevant. But Hayom also refers to Yom Hadin, the day of judgment, the day of Rosh Hashanah. Hashem wants us to know judgment is a serious time. But equally, it's not a time that makes us lower our heads. Atem Nitzavim Hayom, we're standing upright. And equally, Vayeilech, the next of today's parashas, about moving forward and continuously looking for the next right thing to do. These are two very important callings that we have to remind ourselves that we have Shabbos Nitzavim, Shabbos Vayeilech, and it's also Shabbos Salichos, which are important days. there's one more interesting fun fact that we should know about this week's Shabbos. It's not called Shabbos Mevarchim because in Shul we won't stand up after laning and bless the upcoming month, even though Rosh Hashanah will also be the beginning of the next month. But we do say Tehillim. Early morning Shabbos, we read the entire Tehillim, and we certainly try and join a Farbrengen this Shabbos afternoon because it is the Shabbos before the new month. Now, we said it, Rosh Hashanah is the new month, but it's not called Rosh Chodesh, it's known as Rosh Hashanah because it's the head of the whole year. And Chazal tell us, every month, the Jewish people gather together in Shul and bless the upcoming new month. But this week, we will have Hashem's bracha. And Hashem will bless the entire upcoming new year, and it's with the energy of this blessing that Hashem will give in the what we might call the non-Shabbos Mevarchim or the super Shabbos Mevarchim. We will have the energy to continue giving brachas for the entire upcoming year, in a sweet and happy, healthy year. So it's a big week, it's a big Shabbos. Besides, so obviously every day corresponding to a month, this Shabbos is loaded with a double Parshah, a Shabbos Slichos, and a Shabbos super Mevarchim, and of course, it's a time to dig in and to think about what the good things are going on in our life and how we can make them even better. Let's talk a little bit about what Nitzavim Vayeilech are loaded with. As we said, it's not a very long parasha, even though it's double, but each one of these steps are full, and we're going to start off with first Nitzavim and then Vayeilech. So the parasha of Nitzavim has some of the basic principles of Yiddishkeit, starting off with Atem Nitzavim Hayom Cham Kolchem, that all of the different categories or levels amongst the Jewish people are all standing strong. And in one sentence, we talk about the elders and the officers and the heads, down to all the way to the wood choppers and the water carriers and everyone in between, that on one hand have very different roles, and one might look more glitzy, more important, but actually every role in Yiddishkeit is necessary, and all the 10 different categories, each one of them together make a community, and each one does their own role. So this is the important part. On the one hand, we're saying we must have and know our roles, and at the same time we must know that we are all equal in the sense that we are all relevant to the picture. We also read about the Geula in this week's Parsha, where Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Yiddish people before he passes. He says, we're going into the Holy Land, but there will be exile, and the land will become barren. It will be as a result if we don't follow Hashem's halacha. However, even whilst we're in exile, even whilst we're far away, Hashem will return us, and no one will be left behind, and will bring us back to the Holy Land. This is a promise we live with and live by until this day, that we have to shape up our ways and think about what we can improve, but equally we have to be confident that there are good times coming. We also read about the practicality of the Torah mitzvahs. It's not far away. It's not across the sea. Torah mitzvahs are here, are made to work. They're designed for human beings. There are so many gorgeous stories of people who wrote letters to the Rebbe for advice about their business issues and saying that they would love to close their shop on Shabbos, but they can't see how it could work. And the Rebbe, with absolute certainty, explains that closing a Yiddish shop on Shabbos is the best recipe for real success. Short-term success may seem like it's achievable with breaking down the mitzvahs. But the Torah is designed not just for angels, and it's not designed for angels at all. Torah is designed for humans, for us, and for the world that we live in. And therefore it's important for us to know the Torah and the mitzvahs are made to work. And the famous quote, the matter is very close for us to do it in our hearts, in our mouth to say it. And this is the foundational sentence that the Alter Rebbe wrote the entire Tanya. The whole book of Tanya is based on explaining Torah mitzvahs are doable. Not only in actions, because we can do a lot of things that we don't want to do, but to develop a desire, a want to do it, a feeling towards our Yiddishkeit, so that we're not just ticking boxes, but we're passionate. We get nachas from doing the things that we're supposed to do. This is very doable. And this became the foundation of the Alter Rebbe in helping us discover a new barometer of success, a new aspiration, that a new way to measure what we consider good. And on that level, when we get into that frame of mind, when we can identify as neshamas, then feeling for Yiddishkeit becomes natural. And that's what the prophet tells us. We can do it. Us, you and I, normal people, regular people. We're not talking tzaddikim. We're not talking about the righteous and the prophets. We're regular people. We can do it, says the pasuk in this week's Etrich, the Rebbe wanted every child to memorize this verse, amongst others, to remind ourselves that even if it looks like it's so distant, abstract from my reality, it's actually much closer than we thought. It's so doable. The pasuk in Parshah Nitzavim goes on to also talk about that we have the freedom to choose, which, as we spoke in a few shurim ago, we said it's actually a miracle that Hashem allows us to choose. How does a creation get the ability to choose what's right and what's wrong? Can a computer choose? Only do what it's been programmed to do, predictably. But no, Hashem gives us not just the freedom AI seems to have, artificial intelligence. Hashem gives us real choice. And he tells us there's good choices, and unfortunately there's the opposite of good. And he encourages us choose blessings and to choose life over charta v'chaim. He begs from us, choose the right thing. Parshah Nitzavim is a loaded parsha, and Vayeilech no less. The Parshah Vayeilech, which is the second of the two parashas you have this week, goes on to describe how Moshe Rabbeinu starts it by saying, and he's 120 years old, and he's now being told by Hashem to pass over the mantle of leadership people to Yeshua, his successor, who will lead the Yiddish people into the Holy Land, the Promised Land. Before he does that, before he hands it over, he writes the Torah into a scroll, and he gives the Torah to Shevet Levi for safekeeping in the Aron HaKodesh, in the Ark of the Covenant, which will be kept in the Holy of Holies. Fascinatingly, this is often misunderstood. The Sefer Torah that we have today, the written Torah, is so exact that every single Torah you go to around the world has exactly the same psukim, to the letter. And not only every Torah in every place in the world today, but throughout history. It's so sacred, it's so divine, each letter, never being changed once, which is fascinating. It's miraculous in itself. But where did it come from? The answer is in this week's Parshah. When Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down the Torah, dictated by Hashem, word for word, letter by letter. And every Torah that we have today is a copy directly of that very Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down. Which, I'm going to throw in here, we mention it often, but I can't say it enough. Which one came first? The written Torah, the Torah Shebechsav, or the oral Torah, the Torah Shalpeh, the spoken Torah? And of course, the answer is for 40 years in the desert, the Jewish people were doing the mitzvahs that they could do, and were studying the halachas that they were going to engage in when they get into the Holy Land. But all of that was being taught to them orally and spokenly. And it was only written down almost like a notebook where you take notes of the classes, of the teachings that Moshe Rabbeinu was teaching us in its original form. So the original Torah, teach it to student, till us today. The letters, the words that were inscribed, those are the written Torah. So the oral Torah, the spoken Torah, doesn't have the same holiness in its written form, because it is not exact to the letter. But the concept of spoken Torah is the original form of Torah. So if anyone ever complains, oh, the rabbis are making it up, this is how Hashem designed Torah. This is how Hashem designed Messiah. And of course, the written Torah is the notebook that makes sure that we're not playing Chinese whispers. We make sure it correlates with the halachas inside. So that's a little bit about writing the Torah, which we'll speak more about in today's shir. We have the famous mitzvah, the mitzvah of Hakel, once in 7 years after the Shemitah year, where everyone would gather in the Beis Hamikdash at the Shemitah cycle, and the king in the Beis Hamikdash would read for the Torah and encourage us to stay strong and to strengthen ourselves in the keeping of the Torah. At the end of the Torah of Parshah Vayeilech, we have a promise that even if we turn around, the Torah will never be forgotten. And if you think about it, the fact that Torah has never been forgotten, in all these years, with such tremendous persecution, without digital records or communications, or people who are on the run in the furthest and the hardest of times, the Torah miraculously is still around, and us, the people, are still around. These are some of the miracles that Hashem promises us. And to this day, we can look and say, wow, we could ignore it. We could not notice it. But it's so glaring if we only stop and realize just how kind Hashem is to us. More importantly, how everything that is going on is being orchestrated. With a T at every single level. Okay, so this is a little bit about what's going on in Parshah Nitzavim, what's going on in Parshah Vayeilech, what's going on in this week's Parshah, in this week in the calendar. And we want to shift from here to talk about one practical, relevant life message that we want to take from this week's Parshah. We usually discuss tools that will help us in our day-to-day life. This will also be mentioned, but we're going to talk about a practical thing that isn't only a tool, but it's a action point, a to-do list of something we should add to our to-do list that is important. So the question we start off with, that is being well prepared by the Torah Studies team, we ask ourselves, if you were not part of a community or group, what, if anything, would be missing? Living in your forest by yourself. Help me out. Give me some answers. What would we be missing?
People. To be social.
Okay, maybe that's a good thing. Convince me.
I should convince you that community is a good thing. No,
I'm listening.
I don't think so. You can't always do things by yourself. You can think for yourself. You can do certain things by yourself, but to be a person and to do other things, you need other people around you. You don't have to have loads of people. A few good people, and from that you can do things for other people. When you do things for other people, that's good. That's what it's all about. To be part of the community, you know that there will always be somebody there, because a problem shared is a problem halved. And that's
brilliant.
True.
So we need other people. It's part of our being human is to need other people. And we also said specifically when it comes to if there's an issue, we could share an issue, whether it's emotionally and or maybe perhaps even practically someone can help us out. We've got two good points there. Anyone else want to add to this? Why is community important?
Well, one thing is because it's dying, isn't it? Because of social media, because everybody's pressing a button and they don't have to speak to other people. And that will really, really not enhance the future of socialization of everybody. It is very dangerous.
It is very dangerous, but Mrs. Abrams, let's be hopeful.
What, you mean that I will learn how to press a button? Maybe not. Stick to pen and paper.
That maybe we'll have AI communities, artificial intelligence communities. I'm joking, but we're hopeful that as Hashem people will realize that although machines are helpful, they're just dummies. And they only do what you tell them to do, and if you get lost in the machine, you miss out on life. Okay? But I think everybody who spoke up so far would agree that community is important. Anyone else want to weigh in on this question before we move along? Going once, twice, third time. But we will leave the mic open. If anyone wants to unmute, it's *6 on your phone, or just push the space bar if you're using a computer. We are going to look at a mitzvah that we actually looked at recently, and it's the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. And the reason we're looking at it is because it's in this week's Sedra, and it's the final mitzvah of the Torah. And in this mitzvah, we are told, it says the pasuk, and now write for yourself the song and teach it to the children of Israel. Place it into their mouths in order that this song will be for me as a witness for the children of Israel. Now we're just going to borrow a side note here. If all we had was the written Torah and we read this pasuk, there's every chance that we wouldn't know that there's a mitzvah to write an entire Torah. Instead, we would think that we have a mitzvah to write down a song. Which song? The song that's coming up next, which may be next week's Parshah, Hazino Shemayim, and teach it to the children of Israel. And the song would have to be important to remember the song. Now, there are people who make a big point of memorizing the whole song of Hazino Shemayim Adevera, the whole of next week's etc., because of the basic understanding of this verse, where the pasuk seems to be saying, write for yourself the song and teach it to the children as a place in the mouth, and all the song will be as a witness. Okay, so it's something that we should know. However, that's the basic understanding of the written Torah, is that's all we had. But as we said earlier, the spoken Torah is the original Torah. And here we have how it comes down in halacha. It is clear that the song here means the entire Torah, as the pasuk states just below, and it was when Moshe finished writing the words of the Torah in a scroll until the very completion. This indicates that the song includes the entire Torah, with the song Hazinu as well. Further indication this is the entire Torah is the verse, take this Torah scroll and place it alongside the Ark of the Covenant of Hashem, which is clearly referring to not just the song of Hazinu, but it's referring to the entire Torah. Okay, so without getting into the technicalities of how we figured out from the pasuk, let's start with the halacha, which tells us that when there's a mitzvah in this week's Sedra, tell every Jew to write down the Torah and to have it in a way that they could have it sima b'fiyam, placed in their mouth, that we can talk about it and we can study it, that we should be a witness to Hashem. And that's why the halacha tells us every Jew is responsible to write a Torah scroll. It actually makes it into the 613 count, becomes one of the mitzvahs, the final mitzvah of the count, to write down a Torah scroll. Okay? And that's derived from this etc. There's another mitzvah in this etc., which is also mitzvah of Hakel, but we're focusing now on the mitzvah of writing down a Torah, which is a responsibility of every person, every yid. Okay, let's see how this finds itself in the book of the Rambam. Hashem commanded that everyone should write down a Torah scroll for themselves, and if they write it with their hand, Scripture credits it to them as if they received it at Mount Sinai. But if it is impossible for them to write it, they should buy it or hire someone to write it for them. This is the meaning of the verse, write for yourself this song, that we have a mitzvah to write it down, and if we can't write it ourselves, to buy one or to hire someone to write it for us on our behalf. Okay, so if that's the mitzvah of this week's Sedra, comes the question, historically, the Jewish community has not carried out this mitzvah of personally writing a Torah scroll. Question mark, why not? And when we say historically, we don't just mean the communities who were persecuted and had barely enough bread to eat, if that, and therefore didn't have time to write down a Sefer Torah. Let's talk about maybe the more affluent times in Jewish history. Where do we find, we actually don't find, that there was an emphasis of every individual having their own Torah? If that's the mitzvah, the question is, how come historically the Jewish people haven't been fulfilling this mitzvah? We obviously have to better understand what we're saying, but here's the quote in this week's Sedra. So Moshe wrote the song on that day, and he taught it to the children of Israel. After Hashem tells him to tell the people to write the Torah and to teach it to them, the pasuk says that Moshe wrote the Torah and taught it to the children of Israel. So who wrote down the Torah? Moshe. Why upon first receiving the mitzvah of writing a Torah scroll, already from the get-go, the people don't write it down, and instead only Moshe writes it down, and he teaches it to them. It seems like from day one, this mitzvah fell flat, and nobody's tried to lift it. Nobody's tried to raise it, and this is one of the mitzvahs of Hashem. So the question is, how come we don't find it historically and don't write it down? But the question is actually larger and louder. How come from day one, this mitzvah seems to have been a forgotten mitzvah? And this is what we want to focus on, because the answer to this question is going to be a little bit technical. And we're going to see as the generations moved on, there was more of an effort to delve into an understanding of where this mitzvah went and how we should best address this seeming discrepancy between what seems to be the mitzvah and halacha and how we know traditionally the mitzvah was performed. I do want to say that there is a very big importance for every single mitzvah, and we don't say that because I've done 20 or 100 or 150 or 300 or loads of other mitzvahs, therefore I can ignore this mitzvah. That's not even considered a calculation when it comes to performing the instructions of Hashem, and therefore our question is very strong. How is it that throughout the generations, and more specifically from day one, this mitzvah has been left to one side, it seems? Okay, so we'll start off with understanding how it is performed. What we do find the communities historically and today doing with the Torah scroll. This is from the Shulchan Aruch, Choshe Mishpat. There's a kairos, the following, it is in the Sosef. Excuse me. There are certain levies and taxes where a Jewish community may impose upon the entire community, even if there is a majority of people who vote against this tax. This is considered acceptable tax just because it's a community of Yiddish people. One such tax would be to write a Torah scroll. Let's read it inside. The town's inhabitants can compel one another to build a shul, to purchase a Torah scroll, along with other scriptures, so that anyone from the community can come and read from it. So there's a accepted responsibility upon everybody of the town's inhabitants of the entire community that everyone must chip in together to have a Torah scroll available in the shuls so that the community should be able to learn. So this explains a little bit, or could be another explanation, of how everybody gets involved in writing a Torah. Through the community purchasing a communal Torah, and with that, every individual member fulfills their mitzvah. Because everybody can read from the communal Sefer Torah, and therefore, even if I didn't write it myself, but I have access to it myself, then it would be classed as a fulfillment of the mitzvah of writing the Torah, and that would explain that although we don't find mass writings of the Torah, but still everybody has fulfilled the Torah in the way of a communal Sefer Torah. So here's our first reason to be part of a community from a Torah perspective tonight. That is because we need the communal Sefer Torah in order to fulfill our obligation. Unless we're going to write our own. But that's not really what we're looking for. Here we have a fascinating angle. I would suggest that when the community or any other group commissions a Torah scroll to be written on their behalf, that constitutes the fulfilling of the mitzvah of now write for yourself. Writing the Torah scroll and then reading from it is a legitimate form of carrying out this mitzvah. Says Reb Chaim Elazar Wax, the Nefesh Chaya, this is the clear solution in my mind to justify the long-standing tradition by commissioning a scroll for the community, they fulfill the mitzvah. Perhaps this also explains that when you have the inauguration of a new Sefer Torah, it is a massive event where we invite the entire community to come because everybody is a partner in the Sefer Torah. Amazing. Okay, so we have now a halachic, I won't call it a loophole, but a halachic path by which we fulfill the obligation of writing a personal Sefer Torah. And if we would explain it this way, we could go back to from the first time a Sefer Torah was written which was Moshe Rabbeinu, he chose to do it this way. Moshe Rabbeinu chose to teach us this is not a second-class performance of the writing of the Torah. From the get-go, Moshe Rabbeinu says, we all have an obligation to write a Sefer Torah. Let's do this together. I will write it and teach it to everybody. Thereby, everyone will fulfill their obligation of writing the Sefer Torah, it would seem. Where would we find a similar comparison to this sort of idea, where a communal obligation or communal action fulfills a personal obligation, but it's not just a personal obligation, it's an obligation that is responsibility of each individual. You know, if somebody says, I'm going to get the community to have a lot of food and they'll be well fed, unless that individual gets involved in the eating, they're not going to have food and they'll be hungry. Well, if the Torah says each individual has to write their own Torah, if I wasn't involved in writing it, can I really claim that Torah fulfills my obligation? So the comparison would be something to do with the Yom Tov we're looking forward to. Right after Yom Kippur comes Sukkot, and on Sukkot, one of the mitzvahs is to take a set of 4 species, the lulav, the esrog, the hadassim, and the aravis. But interestingly, the mitzvah of lulav and esrog has a very unique clause in it. And that is, that the lulav and esrog that we have to take, we find the 4 species and hold them in our hands, and we make a bracha over them, it's not enough to do the mitzvah. The mitzvah must be done by a set of lulav and esrog that you personally own. You must own your own lulav and esrog. Well, nowadays, perhaps with Sukkah Mart or whatever else you have, and globalization and the industrialization, it's much easier to be able to find a set of lulav and esrog. It certainly wasn't the case in many of the generations of our history. So how could you get an individual to make a bracha over a lulav and esrog if they don't own one? And the answer is, you can pass it along as a gift. I take it, I make a bracha, and then pass it on to someone else as a gift to them, and now it's theirs, and they make a bracha. And when they're finished, they will pass it on to a gift to somebody else. And you hope no one breaks the chain, unless you have even a better idea. And this was the norm in the days of old. Let's read the pasuk, and then we'll talk about how they would do it. It's called the communal lulav and esrog. The pasuk says, you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of a dar tree, date palm fronds, a branch of a braided tree, which is the hadassim, the myrtle, and willows of the brook, and you shall rejoice before Hashem for a 7-day period. Note that first sentence. You shall take for yourselves. And that's obviously an extra word in the Hebrew, or lekachtem b'yom harishon. There's an extra word there, or lekachtem lochem b'yom harishon. And right away we learn that you have to learn, it has to be your own. So what did they do in history? They came up with something called the community esrog. The community esrog is obviously often purchased at a very high price, with imports being very slow. Merchants would travel by horse and buggy for miles and miles to be able to get a kosher esrog, and each community would gather enough money together to be able to purchase a single esrog for the whole community. And everyone would have to give a few kopecks to be able to get on the list of the communal esrog. So although the verse states that it must be for you, the community purchases one esrog in a way that enables everyone to legally use it. What's the idea? Let's read it inside. Our custom it is for every community to make the blessing over one esrog, as every community member agrees to gift their portion of ownership in the esrog to whichever individual on condition that it's returned. So I'll say, I'll give you a gift, and it's yours if you fulfill the following condition. What's the following condition? That when you finish making your bracha, you gift it back. So who owns it whilst I'm holding it for my bracha? I own it, because everyone's gifted to me, providing I fulfill the condition. What's the condition? That when I finish making the bracha, I give it back. If I don't return it, then it was never mine. If I don't return it, then it was never gifted to me, because I didn't fulfill the condition. and therefore the gift never took place. So it's in my interest to gift it back, and it's in everyone else's interest to make sure that this condition is fulfilled. Even if they don't explicitly stipulate this complicated condition, we consider it as if they did. After all, the entire community would certainly be of one mind to grant conditional ownership to each member so that they can make the blessing, because otherwise nobody can make the blessing, and therefore it's within everyone's interest, and it could be assumed to have such a stipulation. This we in the custom in many, many communities. Nowadays you find the same thing when people don't have their own little nesek in shul, or when you find the yeshiva boys, whoever else is going around and sukkahs, and they're offering people the opportunity to make a bracha on lulav, they will say, or they'll have in mind, Matana Manasbahachter, this is yours, and it's completely yours, providing that you give it back to me when you finish making your bracha. And that's how we make sure that everybody owns their own lulav and esrog whilst they're making the bracha, even if they don't have one, even if it's a community esrog. Interesting. Can we apply that same logic to how we have the mitzvah to write our own Sefer Torah? This becomes an innovative idea, which is brought down here. You have a Vesikero. Every time the Torah scroll is taken out and the community reads from it, each member is granted their individual moment of ownership. Or he or she is personally reading, listening to, and studying it from it then. Fascinating. Here you have the Torah scroll is owned by the individual. The individual here would mean probably the family, whoever the person is called up is representing. And at that point, the Torah is not only being used by whoever is using the Torah, it belongs to them. It goes even further to say that it was written for their sake. The mitzvah is to write the Torah. This Torah scroll that they're reading is being made available and gifted to this individual and was written for them in mind so that they can fulfill the mitzvah. As far as the generation in the desert was concerned, Moshe carried out the mitzvah on their behalf as their communal representative. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu was well positioned to be the representative who would write something that would be for each individual member of the Jewish people at the time in such a way that each one of them would have the mitzvah fulfilled as a personal Sefer Torah, although it was communal. However, this definitely explains to us why we don't find 600,000 men rushing to quickly start writing a Sefer Torah the minute Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the commandment. And equally, we don't find today every individual when they turn bar mitzvah to quickly start writing or commissioning a Sefer Torah at the cost of £25,000 or whatever else it is. Instead, we have people joining in to a community. By joining into a community, they have a portion in the Sefer Torah, and comes Simchas Torah. In just a month from now, every person, every male should get a call up, and everybody should have a connection to the Torah, which is theirs in itself. But we're not there yet. Here's another quote. On that day, Moshe wrote 13 Torah scrolls, one for each tribe and another to stow in the ark. And this kind of backs up what we're saying, that each family or each community, each tribe had their own Torah, and therefore there was 13 Sefer Torah in that day that ties in. Okay, let's look for the next part. When we are a part of the Sefer Torah by being part of the community, then we have a connection to the Torah scroll by way of community. The reality is that many people would go through many years without having a single call-up. And unfortunately, the reality is that many people who don't go to shul regularly. More importantly, although we may have fulfilled the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah by being part of the community, it's always a good time to up the game. And as a way to actively fulfill the mitzvah, this letter in the Sefer Torah campaign was launched by the Rebbe, encouraging every Jewish man, woman, and child to purchase their own letter in a Torah scroll. What does it mean to purchase our own letter? It means that you own a letter in the Torah, and if you were to remove your letter from the Torah, the entire Sefer Torah would be unkosher. which in other words means the entire Torah scroll is dependent on your letter, which means that your letter carries the weight of the entire Torah scroll. So by owning just one letter in the Torah scroll, that one letter is equal to having written an entire Torah, because it's that every letter counts, and if just one letter was broken or missing, it would be an unkosher Torah. In liturgy of the Shabbos and Festal Musaf prayer, we say, I have redeemed you at the end as in the beginning. This means to say that at the end, at the future redemption, will come by carrying out the final mitzvah to write a Torah scroll, as well as the first mitzvah to have children. This is a quote from the Ben Ish Chai, and the Ben Ish Chai writes fascinatingly that at the end of time, when it comes closer to the times of Mashiach, we should be more careful in the first mitzvah and the last mitzvah. As we say in davening, Hashem says He will redeem us. He has redeemed us, achris kivreshes, like the final mitzvah as the first mitzvah. That's the Ben Ish Chai. What is the last mitzvah in the Torah? The last mitzvah in the Torah is writing a Sefer Torah. What's our gain in writing a Sefer Torah? And what's the first mitzvah in the Torah? Pru Revu, to go forth and multiply, doing everything we can, everything that's in our possibility, to have children and to bring up these children. And these two mitzvahs, as the Ben Ish Chai, are directly connected to bringing the real change, goodness in our reality. Brings Mashiach and Geula. These two mitzvahs are so essential. So what we've said so far is that we have fulfilled the mitzvah by being part of a community. And the communal Sefer Torah includes every person in the community, even if we didn't write it, just by the mere fact that the Torah is written on behalf of each community member. And we said also we should encourage each other to go with Simchas Torah when it's the time for the Aliyahs. But here we're saying take it up a notch. Build it up. As the final mitzvah in the Torah, this mitzvah is uniquely situated to hasten Mashiach's arrival, which is the final chapter in our collective story, and therefore, writing a letter in the Sefer Torah is part of the major mitzvah campaigns that the Rebbe launched, Mitzvah Ois Sefer Torah, where every single person should have a letter in Sefer Torah that they own, not just part of the community by default, but being part of the community of Sefer Torah actively up in the game. And of course, it ties into the first mitzvah, as Ben Ish Chai says, having children. But here goes a step further. It's not just that you own a letter, which is a stronger way to fulfill a mitzvah. The mitzvah to write a Torah scroll is the conclusion of all 660 mitzvahs. So when all Jews will have their own personal letter in the Torah scroll, we will speedily merit the conclusion of this exile, a redemption in which every Jew will be liberated with the coming of Mashiach, and therefore we encourage everybody to do what we can. Here's the edge though. It has a letter in the final mitzvah. You have an active mitzvah of the final mitzvah, the redemption mitzvah, but more than that, by purchasing a unique letter, each Jew links up, unity, unites with another, while amplifying their individual importance in the overall Jewish community. The letter in the Torah teaches us. Every letter is a unique individual. Two letters are joined in the Torah is not kosher. If one person's personality is lost behind someone else's, we have to redo that. But at the same time, every letter of the Torah needs all the other letters. Unity isn't about losing our identity. Unity is about each one of our identities merging into one whole. And therefore, it further connects to the idea of redemption. The actos that bringing a letter in the Torah brings is so powerful, is so enormous, and that's one of the major reasons why the mitzvah Ois Sefer Torah is so relevant. Every mitzvah in the Torah achieves unity among the Jewish people still. This campaign of communal Torah scrolls achieves a superior form of unity, for it brings Jews together through the act of writing a Torah scroll and bequeathing a unique letter to each Jew, as we'll explain. But first, let's explore the idea that the Torah is what possesses the power to unite the Jewish people is in the Torah. When a Jew is told that he or she must unite with every other Jew, from the heads of the tribes to the wood choppers and water carriers in this week's Parshah, one cannot help but ask, how is this even possible? The gap between the Rabbanim, the Tzaddikim, the heads of the tribes, the wood choppers and water carriers is quite extreme. So how is it possible to unite with both the head of a tribe and the wood carriers and water carriers, polar opposites? And the answer is that the only the infinite Torah has the power to unite all the Jewish people from the head of the tribes to the warriors and water drawers, despite the vast distance. The answer is Torah. It helps us understand just how great is the unity achieved through tangible action. There are many other practical mitzvahs that achieve the same result. There's a unique quality to the unity achieved through every Jew purchasing a letter in Torah scroll. This will explain the entire notion of unity among Jews is achieved only through the power of Torah, and therefore unity through Torah is so powerful. Here's the link, a general Torah scroll for adults, about the /409-282. Or if you have children who are still under Bar Bas Mitzvah, encourage them to buy a letter in the unique children's Torah scroll. The website, it's kidstorah.org, the organization, /buy a letter. Okay, we learned something today, and I wish everybody a Ksiva Simateva. And of course, Be'ez Hashem, we should only have good news. It should be a lichtige yar, and I'm hoping that next week we'll have a class. Either way,